In the year 79 AD, the people of Pompeii lived in the shadow of a mountain they had never once feared. It had been sending them warnings for 17 years. They read them as bad luck and rebuilt. In a single day, that mountain buried them where they stood and kept them hidden for 17 centuries. This is Disaster Lens. Pompeii was not a doomed city. It was an ordinary one, and a comfortable one, a busy Roman town on the Bay of Naples. Perhaps 15 to 20,000 people, grown rich on trade, wine, and the fertile black soil of the coast. It had a forum, temples, theatres, public baths, fed by an aqueduct, bakeries, brothels, and walls scratched with the graffiti of everyday life, election slogans, insults, love notes. Above the town stood Mount Vesuvius, green to its summit, terraced with vineyards, so gentle and so fertile that no one thought of it as a threat. And here is the strange heart of this story. The Romans did not know Vesuvius was a volcano. There had been no eruption in living memory, none for centuries. To the people who farmed its slopes, it was simply a mountain, a good one. A generation earlier, the rebel gladiator Spartacus had hidden his army inside its quiet crater. There had been one great shock. In the year 62, a powerful earthquake had torn through Pompeii, collapsing buildings, cracking temples, killing livestock. The philosopher Seneca recorded it and noted something stranger still. A flock of 600 sheep had been found dead in the open fields, as if the air itself had poisoned them. We now read that for exactly what it was, volcanic gas seeping up from the ground. To Seneca, it was a curiosity. 17 years later, the town was still repairing the earthquake's damage. You can still see the half-finished rebuilding in the ruins today. But to the Romans, an earthquake was just an earthquake. Campania shook often. They patched the walls, and they stayed. They never connected the shaking ground to the quiet green mountain above them. This is what makes Pompeii different from most disasters. The Titanic was warned and ignored its warnings. The people of Pompeii were warned too, but they could not read what the warnings meant. The danger was real, and it was building, and not one person in the town had the knowledge to recognize it, because the warnings did come. In the days before the eruption, the earth began to tremble, more and more often. But as a young Roman named Pliny would later write, the tremors were not particularly alarming because they are frequent in Campania. The shaking ground was simply part of life on that coast. No one read it as a countdown. There were other signs, quieter ones. Springs and wells are said to have run dry as the mountains swelled beneath them and the water shifted underground. The animals grew uneasy. To us, with everything we now know, these are textbook signs of a volcano waking up. To a Roman in 79 AD, they were a run of bad luck, an inconvenience, an omen at worst, but nothing to abandon a home and a business over. And so life went on. The markets opened, the baths filled. The town kept rebuilding from the last earthquake, brick by brick, right at the foot of the thing that was about to kill it. There was no evacuation, because there was no concept of the threat. You cannot flee a danger you don't know exists. Every warning was there. No one in Pompeii could read a single one of them. Then, around midday, on a day in the autumn of 79 AD, the mountain opened. With a force that has no comparison in ordinary life, Vesuvius blasted a column of ash, pumice, and superheated gas straight up into the sky, eventually reaching some 20 miles high. Across the bay, watching from the town of Misenum, the young Pliny searched for words. It rose, he wrote, like a great tree, a tall trunk of cloud, spreading at the top into branches, like an umbrella pine. He was describing, for the first time in recorded history, the shape of a major eruption. We still call this kind of blast a Plinian eruption, after a teenager grasping for a way to describe the end of the world. From that same vantage, the young Pliny left us the only first-hand account of the hours that followed. The ground heaved so violently that carts lurched back and forth across flat stone. The sea was sucked away from the shore, stranding fish on the bare sand. A vast black cloud spread over the bay, ripped through by flashes of fire. And then the darkness came, not the dark of a moonless night, he wrote, but the pitch black of a sealed room with the lamp blown out. People found one another by voice alone, calling for parents, for children, unable to see a hand in front of their faces. Some wept, some prayed, and many were certain the gods themselves had died, and the world was ending in an eternal night. Over Pompeii itself, the sky turned black, and it began to rain stone. For most of a day and a night, pumice and ash fell on the town, light at first, then piling into the streets, foot after foot. Roofs groaned and gave way under the weight. Many people fled in those hours, out into the dark. Many others sheltered indoors, waiting for it to pass. The waiting killed them, because the falling ash was not the thing that would erase Pompeii. That came next. The eruption drew a witness of a different kind. Pliny the Elder, the young writer's uncle, a famous naturalist, and the commander of the Roman fleet, did not run from the mountain. He sailed toward it, partly to study it up close, partly to rescue people trapped along the shore. He reached the coast at Stabii, and there, overcome by the fumes and the falling ash, the most curious man in the Roman world died on the beach, having gone to look at the thing everyone else was fleeing. Through the night, the towering column began to collapse under its own weight. What came down the mountain then was the true killer: pyroclastic surges, avalanches of gas and rock, hundreds of degrees hot, moving faster than any person could run. The first of them tore into Herculaneum, the town closest to the mountain. For centuries, it was assumed the people of Herculaneum had escaped. Almost no bodies were found in the town. Then, in the 1980s, excavators reached the old seafront and opened the stone boat sheds that had once faced the water. Inside were some 300 skeletons, men, women, and children who had fled to the shore and crowded into the arches, waiting for rescue boats that never came. They had not drowned, and they had not suffocated. The surge that reached them was so hot, perhaps 500 degrees, that it killed every one of them in an instant, exactly where they crouched. And by morning, the surges reached Pompeii. They died where they stood, in doorways, in beds, huddled with their families, a dog still chained in a courtyard. Not over hours, in moments. When it was over, Pompeii was gone. Not damaged, gone. Buried under some 15 to 20 feet of ash and stone. Herculaneum lay deeper still. The shape of the coastline itself had changed. And in time, the towns were not just abandoned, but forgotten. Their names fading into legend, their streets sealed beneath a grey blanket that hardened into rock. We know what that day looked like for one reason. The young Pliny survived across the bay, and decades later he wrote 2 letters describing it: the eruption, the panic, the death of his uncle. They are the only eyewitness account of the disaster that exists. They are why his name is stamped on every eruption like it ever since. Pompeii stayed lost for nearly 17 centuries. When excavators finally broke into it in the 1700s, they found something no one expected. Not rubble, but a Roman town frozen mid-breath. Frescoes still bright on the walls. Graffiti still legible. Loaves of bread still sitting in the ovens where the bakers had left them. The detail was almost unbearable in its ordinariness. Election slogans were still painted on the walls, campaigning for men 17 centuries dead. A mosaic at one doorway still warned visitors to beware of the dog. There was food left out on tables, eggs, walnuts, bread, abandoned mid-meal. Pompeii had not been cleaned up for history. It had been caught exactly in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. And then came the most haunting discovery of all. The bodies of the dead had decayed inside the hardened ash, leaving hollow spaces in their exact shape. In the 1800s, an archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli realized he could pour liquid plaster into those voids, and when it set, it captured the people of Pompeii in their final moment. A mother shielding her child, a man covering his face, a dog twisted against its chain. The famous figures of Pompeii are not bones. They are plaster. Poured into the empty space, a human being left behind. And from the town it destroyed, we learned the science itself. Everything we now understand about this kind of eruption, the towering column, the killing surge, we first understood by studying Pompeii. Pompeii is remembered as a city frozen in a single moment. But it was never a moment. The mountain had been speaking for 17 years, and the disaster lay not in a decision the Romans made, but in something they could not do. Read a warning for a danger no one had taught them to see. An earthquake they filed under bad luck. A flock of sheep dead in a field. Tremors they shrugged off as the way of the coast. Wells running dry. A green and gentle mountain that no one knew could kill. Each was a link in the chain. But unlike the Titanic, the people of Pompeii couldn't pull a single one of those links out because they never knew the chain was there. That is the lesson that outlived them. A warning you cannot understand is no warning at all. And the first job of safety is learning to see a danger before it arrives. Today, around 3 million people live in the shadow of Vesuvius. It is not extinct. It is only sleeping. Watched around the clock by an observatory built for exactly that purpose, with a standing plan to move the hundreds of thousands who live inside the official red zone. The difference between them and Pompeii is not luck. It is that now we know what the mountain is, and we have finally learned to read it. Every disaster is a chain. The links are decisions, or the warnings we cannot yet read. Learn to read them, and the chain doesn't form. That is what we are here to study.